from Music for All and presented by Yamaha. Welcome to teaching social emotional learning through music. And now, here's your host, Scott Edgar.
Hi, welcome to our next episode of Teaching Social and Emotional Learning Through Music. I'm Scott Edgar, and today we have the gift of speaking to one of the leaders in well-being in music education, social and emotional learning in service of being our whole, true, authentic, best selves that we can be, to get beyond surviving to a space of thriving. Our guest today is Rita Gigliotti. Rita, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm really excited to talk about well-being. I certainly have my own personal, it's very personal and very important to me, especially having been a K-12 public school teacher for over 20 years. Now, teaching in the college realm, I see the same trends, the same things with both our students and my colleagues and my peers. So I think it's an incredibly important word right now, especially post-COVID or within this realm of COVID and how COVID has also changed just trajectory, I think, of how we're moving forward in the system of education at large and where our priorities need to be.
Absolutely. Your wealth of experience and where you are now is such an interesting story. Share a little bit about where you come from, and you're coming to us now from Virginia. Tell us your story.
Yes. So I think this is relatable to most of us in the profession, catching the bug early on as a young person, very early age, pretty much out of the womb, I would say, in some regards, but literally singing, dancing, playing, engaging in music. Since I could read, talk, walk, all of those things, and being very passionate about it, and knowing I was fortunate enough, because I know not all of us have this journey, but I was fortunate enough that I knew exactly who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do when I was 10. And it came from that pivotal children's choir experience, children's choir audition. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, so the southern part, western part of Pennsylvania. And I was at a children's choir audition back in the day with Christine Jordanoff. And we were doing, it was the Children's Festival Chorus, I think, and it was at Duquesne University. And that was my defining moment of like, oh, this is what I want to do. This is who I want to be. And so that took me through pursuing music education, my undergraduate, and then my master's degree. And then I spent my first part of my career in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, teaching in the suburbs. I taught general music and choir. And then in 2005, I moved to Northern Virginia area and taught for Fairfax County for 17 years. And I knew my whole life, I was a kid who struggled with chronic illness throughout my life. I knew that music had a role in that, but I didn't truly understand the power of music as a tool for well-being until 2017, when my life really came to a halt and I was diagnosed with Cushing's disease. And so just a short part of that is the disease itself is rooted in an overproduction of cortisol. So while this really shut me down as a teacher, as a musician, as a human, lost my life for a while, and I was on leave for over a year, which was very difficult for me because I would say that that's when the music stopped, right? And then what I can say about that part of my life was which was also super pivotal, was that it also made me reflect on what I was doing, how I was going to get back to my job, because I was taken out for the count. And I had to sort of sit on the sidelines and watch it happen. And that was really, really difficult for me because music is who I am. Like, it's embedded in my core, right? And so I think that changed my perspective about, well, how now am I going to rebuild my own physical self, emotional, mental, social, everything, my whole self, to be able to be accessible and available to my students the way they need me when I get back. And that was a really difficult journey. I struggled, but I, at the time, had also felt very drawn to start a program, which I know people would say, what, you're starting a program in the middle of like your recovery back to your position, back to your life. But actually that program was a Music for Wellbeing program at George Mason. I was feeling very much called at that time to go and explore it. And that changed my life because it re-centered the role music was playing in my life, my entire life, but more so how I was going to move forward in cultivating an environment that I could sustain every day as a teacher with all the different demands, with all the different unique stressors of our jobs as music educators. And so that's what then led me to the phase of my life that I'm in now, which is I became so passionate about the work that I said, I want to do my PhD in music education, and I want this to be a center of my research. So that's where I am now. I'm at George Mason. I'm doing my PhD in music education. I also teach the Music for Wellbeing coursework, and we have a Music for Wellbeing Healing Arts Ensemble, which is a really cool thing. So that's really how I ended up where I am at this moment. Yeah.
Rita, I adore everything you said because above anything else, it feels embedded. And that's one of our big things about how do we talk about social and emotional learning, that it can't be music and SEL. It can't be music and well-being. It has to be that really symbiotic relationship where both are moving forward. You know, I think before we dig any deeper into, I want to talk about the ensemble because
Sure.
that's the bread and butter where I'm really have a lot of curiosity, and I think our listeners and viewers would really like to understand what that looks like. I think we need to define well-being. I think because right now it is such a term that is just flying. Like we have our teachers who are burned out. We have our teachers who are struggling. We have so many of these words that are just part of our vocabulary that I don't think we really know what we're talking about anymore when we talk about well-being. Because sometimes, just to be blunt for 2 seconds, sometimes like well-being for me, I can take 2 weeks off. I can do absolutely nothing. I can do no work, and that would be good for my well-being. But I think there are some more nuanced ways that we need to look at well-being that is going to really set us up to be contributing members of our schools and still take care of ourselves.
Absolutely. And so I want to say that this define well-being, right? This was actually, I'm just finishing up a qualitative study with music teachers. And that was the first question I asked them. And the first few moments of that answer were silent because I don't think we really think about it enough. And I don't think we're necessarily in tune, as you said, to the various ways that it threads through our lives. So the first thing I want to say about that is it's an awareness for me. It's an awareness first, right? I think that we can talk all day about, oh, I can go on vacation, I can do this, I can do that. But why are we doing it? What part of ourselves is it fulfilling? And are we aware of all the facets of our well-being? So for me, it's an awareness, and it's a place in a state of optimal balance of social, emotional, mental, physical, spiritual. It really has to hit them all for me. And I think a lot of times in our hierarchy of survival, we only have the time to maybe center in on one or two of those things, but they're all connected and they're all embedded, and they all make the difference in how we can cope every single day in life, right? So for me, it's the awareness and the state of where I am. And when we say well-being, then optimally, it should be an optimal state, a feeling of equanimity, a feeling of balance, a feeling that we're grounded and centered in every day when we wake up.
Rita, I love that. And what I think I'm hearing is that many of us are in a state of survival right now, right? We're just going through to get enough to survive. And this idea of well-being, optimal state, is getting to us a space of thriving. Can you do me a favor? Can you repeat those areas? So I heard physical, social, emotional, keep going.
Mental and spiritual.
Can you give us just 10 seconds on each of those to help us understand? Because I think for me, I'm thinking slices of a pie, parts of my identity, and how, as you're talking, I'm going into my own well-being well here and thinking about how each one of those function for myself. Just give us a little bit on each one of those different parts.
Okay, so I will preface this by saying that I have a little formula that I personally use that I've learned that fills up these cups, or the ounces of the cup, if you will. So for mental well-being, I think of what is my mental state? Am I going into the day rolling out of bed? Oh, it's a rainy day, kind of like, oh, I don't know, how am I going to get through all this? What am I doing to move that mindset? So for me, it's the starting place of what's my mindset every day. And it's not always easy to change the narrative, to flip the narrative in your mind. But I think gratitude for me is a starting point. And I know that may sound cliche because we hear all about these trends right now. But really, truly, how I'm looking at my day, how I'm looking at what's in front of me, and reevaluating mentally, like, okay, maybe it's not going to be the easiest day, but let me find the one thing in this moment that is a positive that's going to help me move through those other challenges. For me physically, it's, do I feel rested? Do I feel like I got good sleep, right? Am I totally wiped out from the week, from a concert the night before, whatever it is? So feeling fully charged, battery loaded, rested, centered. My mind is in a state of clarity that I can move forward. Socially, I think this ties into our society for sure at large. Socially, am I concerned? Who are my people? Who are my people? Who am I showing up for today? Is it the kids? Is it my colleagues? Is it my administrators? Is it my family? And what is going on in each of those realms that is in my control and also may not be in my control? And how am I responding to those social interactions? So that's really important. Emotion for me is tied to all of these. So, if I'm not in a good mental place, if I'm not feeling rested, if I'm struggling with a relationship or a student or some stressor at work or at home, that's going to play into my emotional well-being. My emotional well-being for me is my ability to have that resilience and figure out how I'm going to move through it in a positive way, something that's going to uplift me. We know, I think I want to just put this out there, that the state of the word energy, we think about how we move energy. And for me, all of these are tied to how I'm moving my energy towards. So if my mental well-being is in a positive place and my physical well-being means, oh, I've gotten some great rest, I'm ready to go. And my social well-being is, what? I have a great relationships with whoever, things are going well. I feel supported. Emotionally, I'm going to feel better defaultly. And then lastly is spiritually. And I think this can take shape in a variety of ways, whether this is you practicing your faith or this is just centering yourself and connecting to yourself and what's happening on the inside. I think that is as much as a spiritual recognition of who you are as anything else. And that can connect outwardly to a variety of different ways in which you practice that aspect.
Rita, that was immensely helpful. That was gold right there for you to walk through what that looks like for you. I think for me, I was positioning myself in each of those areas. Thank you. That was a gift. I so appreciated that. So many of us are going into our classroom with a bucket that has holes in it. And we might think that we're going to go home or we're going to have a weekend, or as we're approaching summer vacation, that's going to fix everything. Probably not is actually the answer. Rita, can you talk to us a little bit about that relationship between teacher well-being, and then once we have that piece somewhat figured out, that role of how do we start to do this work with our students?
Yeah, so I can personally say this was a big area for me to figure out how to manage and restore, right? Because my world was totally rocked upside down. And I mentioned before that my disease was an overabundance of cortisol, which is our stress hormone. So when I had my surgery, that took everything back to zero, which was good, but also I needed to figure out how I was going to continue to maintain that. And I think that when we think about our teacher well-being, I think one thing, so I mentioned earlier that I was finishing a qualitative study on this with music teachers right now. And what we learned was that music teacher well-being was multifaceted. And I think that as music teachers, first of all, we need to evaluate what our identity is to our role as educators and how we embed ourselves into that, because I think that's important. I think we need to also look at our agency. And I think with music teachers, unique job stressors, and also the added layer of COVID now and the different things that we might be dealing with in our home lives that hadn't been a thing before, that we know that the external pressures come in from outside into the classroom. So it's not just, oh, I'm going to manage my well-being because I work out. I'm just going to do a meditation. I'm just going to this. I'm just going to that. It's not a one-stop thing. It might be a facet. Like I had said earlier, for me, well-being is all of it. So it might be a facet, but then what else are we not realizing, recognizing, aware of? And so I think a lot of us have gone to, well, I'm just going to set boundaries, and boundaries are important and boundaries are great, right? Boundaries of how often you might be after school or not, or what you prioritize as a realistic in the course of a day for yourself, or how you plan out your year. All of those things are important. But we have to do better at embedding and being more aware of how we're going to actually refill the cup. So that can look like a lot of different things. For me, rest is important. Evaluating at nighttime, when do we shut it off? Is our email on our device for school? Why? Do we need it to be, right? That's also a boundary. I think that what are our practices throughout the day? Are we taking our lunch break? Or are we working through our lunch break? Why are we doing that? That's an important thing to stop and pause and look at, because it's not just about what we do outside of school. It's not going to solve the problems when we get back into the classroom and we are dealing with fight or flight all day long. And I think that we need to recognize that our students, for a lot of us, are affecting our own well-being because we're having to come to every need. We're trained in everything, right? Depending on what age you teach, that can look like a lot of different things all at once. So we're overstimulated. We're always in a fight or flight mode of how am I going to manage this, manage that, manage whatever. So I think that when we start our day, when we go into our classrooms, what does our environment feel like to us? Does it feel good to be there? Do we have a place where we feel nurtured? What is our surrounding? How can we better change that environment? How do we look at our to-do list every day? How much do we engage in our email while we're teaching? Is it on? Because I know for myself, the stuff coming off my phone, the email being silenced, shut out, so that I'm only focused on what's in front of me at that moment. And then that ability to really pause throughout the day, to really take the 5 minutes. We think a lot of times, because especially I will say this in secondary, I think this is a big deal. The next adjudication, the next performance, the next. We don't have time for that. We don't have time for this. We don't have time to take care of ourselves. We got to push the kids to get to the next thing. The reality is that pushing isn't going to get you there faster. It's probably going to result in a meltdown or a burnout, in you needing to take a break. Something's going to not work out, right? So I think that how we are looking at the way we approach our day, our environment, our own self-stock that day, and make a day list of what is actually attainable for me today. That is going to start to set us up better for all the things we're not anticipating that might happen in the school day, right? And when we think about that, our students are also responding to us, because again, energy is everything, right? And so if our energy is feeling unsettled and unbalanced, and we're dysregulated and we're looking and appearing stressed out, they pick up on that super quick, and their response is going to be impacted by that. So how are we navigating that? For me, I love to embed well-being practices or healing-centered practices into my every class for them as much as for myself. Because if I'm down regulating multiple times a day with a breath exercise or with just taking a pause or having a moment of gratitude, whatever it is that they're benefiting from, I'm now benefiting from. And what I saw when I shifted my practices of how I started my rehearsal, how I managed my students, that changed how I was able to have the energy to make it through the rest of my entire day leaving school, going home to my family, settling down at night to get the rest I needed to be productive the next day. So I think that we have to look deeper. It can't just be a one shot done thing that I do once a day. It has to be embedded throughout the day, just like we talk about social emotional learning. And the other piece of this that I see and I hear that comes with the words social and emotional learning, that goes back to what I said earlier, is teachers are always being asked to do another thing to help the student. We know the research says that teachers need social and emotional learning, but how we are facilitating that work is often the barrier to it being received in a positive way. Music teachers are doing it all day long anyway, but are they recognizing it in themselves? Are their administrators recognizing it? And are they aware of how it can look different, or which parts of their world of being a music maker are actually servicing their well-being, why it's so intertwined? And I think that just bringing that recognition to the forefront and realizing, hey, you know what? The reason why everything starts to settle in once we get started with the music is because it's down-regulating, it's syncing our heartbeats, it's down-regulating our breathing, it's turning on our vagus nerve. That's the social and emotional first entry point to then all the other things. So I think sometimes it's our perception of what that means and the way it's been presented to us from our educational system, and then really honing in on, hey, the arts classes are doing this all day long. So I think it's multifaceted. I hope that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, Rita. The challenge that I'm working through right now is the restoration. You said the word restore, and that really hit deeply. And then you said one of my favorite terms right now, which was healing centered, right? How can our classrooms be a space for healing centered? It's the intentionality, though, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Right? It's how intentional we are with this work.
Yes. And I will say intentionality in everything. And that is the core of what we're here to do as music makers, right? So yes, I'm sorry, continue.
No, that was it. It's just that, so many of these things we can say that we do it all day, every day. But I've been in some really unhealthy music classrooms in my life, whether I'm observing a student teacher, whether it's my own classroom, whether it's a teacher that I've had in my life, that I think, what really, you got me thinking there for a second, beyond this isn't a one-off. This isn't I'm going to do one thing that's going to help advance this. This is a one-trick pony that I'm going to automatically be well. It's about routines. It's about habits. It's about changing our habits. And if anyone has had to break a habit, we know how hard that is.
Yes.
And that's that awareness that you were speaking so eloquently to.
Yes. For me, I changed when I went back after my little real hard journey with life or death for a bit. When I went back, I started to change the way my environment felt for me, for my students. I also started to change how I started my class, how I started my rehearsal, how I redirected the intention to the moment. And so the one thing I will say that I saw after COVID, coming back from virtual learning into the classroom, were that students were so disconnected from the present moment that they would literally, I could see it in their faces while they were singing, and I'd be saying, what are you thinking about right now? Oh, I'm thinking about this fight I had. I'm thinking about blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking about my math test. I'm like, how are you singing right now, thinking of these things? I couldn't connect to that as a musician. So I was like, whew, we have now entered a new problem. So now how are we really going to reteach them how to center? So for me, I used the music. I used the breath work. I used the redirecting of our thoughts when we came in. I like to say it was clearing the clutter. I actually started to teach them, there's something called the humming effect that Jonathan Goldman, he's a pioneer in the sound healing world. And he has a whole book on this. But to sum it up, really engaging our students in vocalizing and humming, it could be for 30 seconds to start or for a minute, Maybe it's humming before, it's the sound before symbol approach if we're teaching elementary or middle school band or even high school, right? Because I know for singers it's more innate. But just that simple act of coming in together and coming together to put our voices on that is already a starting point to starting to slow the body down. That next step is, okay, what do we feel right now? What's it making us aware of? And then how are we going to redirect that with, maybe it's an affirmation, maybe it's a certain thing that you set up with your students that gets them engaged in that moment, that takes them into their music in a different way. And then we get to the intention. And what I have found is embedding healing practices like box breath or some humming work or gentle like stretching and yoga and getting the body moving and centering in on those things. It's helping the student become more present with themselves. Then we can talk about vulnerability. Then we can talk about artistry. Because at the center of artistic work and art is vulnerability. And vulnerability means we have to get out of here and we have to get into what's in front of us. And that to me right now is the largest barrier we're having with getting kids to connect to each other, to us, to our art form, at least in the K-12, but I see it happening in the collegiate world as well.
I see it happening in the adult world.
Yes.
I mean, this is at all layers of our society.
Yes.
You know, so many things that you're saying right now are just really deeply resonating with me. And as parents, as teachers, I'm reminded constantly, as colleagues, as partners, I'm reminded constantly that an escalated adult cannot de-escalate an escalated child.
Correct.
Right? We need to be in a calm, assertive space.
Yes.
That we know that's when we are thriving, that we're able to really help our students with so many of the things that you're talking about, whether it be the humming, whether it be the controlling our heart rate. We need to be in that calm, assertive space, though.
Yes, that's really what it is to start, I think. And the other piece of this is the overstimulation of our society. And that's really hard to break. And I think a lot of teachers are afraid. I think I'm not prepared to do this. I'm not the counselor. I'm not the this. Really, it's not that. It's just really about taking the moment to just be present with each other, because that's why they're in the room to begin with. They're there because they feel safe. They're there because they love making music. They're there because they like the way the music makes them feel. And so you can use that as your launching pad, right? But I think that first and foremost, as the adult in the room, we have to be willing to also start to take stock in that for ourselves. And so starting my day, 5 minutes at lunch to just maybe turn on a calm app or a short guided meditation. Maybe I'm just going to sit there and hum for a little bit to an ambient sound, and it's just going to help me recenter, bring myself back into that place so that when I walk into my classroom, and maybe that's the moment where all the fireworks go off, who knows? But I'm already feeling more centered to manage that and help my students before that might even happen, get to that mindset. What I found in my high school choral classroom specifically was when I started to introduce that ability to clear the clutter. And I didn't start, I'll say that I know this is also a tricky word, is meditation, right? That can be a thing that scares people. I didn't really call it that. I'm like, let's just focus our minds. Let's get our minds centered together, right? Let's do it through the music. Let's do it through this activity. Let's create some harmonies together. Let's really center in on what we're hearing and listening. But that exercise of engaging the voice and the breath work brought the energy down in the room. And then suddenly we were connecting. I also used the ambiance of like some softer lighting. I got rid of the overstimulating fluorescent lights. I brought that to place. And the days where I was feeling like the usual music educator, we don't have time for that. We need to get right to this. The kids would stop me. No. We need to start with this today. We really need to go back. We need this right now. We need to let go of what happened last period. Can we please take those 5 minutes? And that 5 minutes or 1 minute or 2 minutes at the beginning gave me more time back, gave me more. And that's what it's like. It's not going to take your time away. It's actually going to give you a more engaged group of students, and you physically are going to be more present to do the work that you want to do.
Thank you for saying that, because I think that mystical thing of time is a roadblock for many people.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't have time. I have to get ready for the concert. And the recentering that first 5 minutes can give us is going to make everything else far more productive. I also love that your students held you accountable.
Yes.
That they said, no, we have to do this.
Yeah.
That is the routine.
Yeah.
That is the habit. They found something that they liked.
Yes.
And let's have a healthy addiction to being well.
Yes.
Right? That's okay.
Yes.
The other thing that I love about what you said is there's this thing that I've heard time and time again, that, we just leave our baggage at the door and we come in and make music. And that's what we do here. It's impossible. And to be blunt, it's insulting.
Yeah.
Right? The baggage is going to come in whether we like it or not.
Right.
And that centering that you speak to is necessary for us to realize if we're going to have anything productive in our classrooms, it needs to be acknowledged.
Yes. With the college students that I work with, the first thing they do when they come in the door, I have an anonymous gratitude journal and I pass it around. And so we talk about reframing immediately. And I tried it this semester as a new thing, and the end of semester, that was the one thing they all commented on. I love that I came in and I reframed before I started. So it's the same thing, no matter what level you're teaching. It stopped me to reframe me before I started. Write down the thing I'm grateful for in this moment. It flipped that switch. So that's just an example of one simple thing you could ignite in a classroom that's taking no time at all, but it's making you pause and reflect to get you into a better place, so that when we make music and we make art, we want our intention in that moment to be whole, warm. That's how we're going to connect to our audience. And we're trying to practice those processes in our rehearsals. So we have to look at how we get to that space before the concert day, right? So just as an aside, as an example. Yeah.
Rita, thank you for that. So that reframe, when we talk about, we as music teachers, we're not counselors, we're not therapists, we're not mental health professionals. But there are some things that we can learn from our friends who are. And you said one of the 5 core practices that typically a mental health professional would engage us in, and that's reframing. And what you just suggested, I think, is even more powerful, because you're giving us a strategy where they're able to reframe themselves, where they're able to do this work and flip that switch in their own work, and that true autonomy that we speak to. We've been flirting with this for the last few minutes, Rita, but how does SEL play a role with well-being?
Yeah.
How does SEL, these areas that we're talking about, these life skills, how does it play that role?
Social and emotional learning is rooted in how we literally address the social emotional needs of our students. And without it in our everyday, we cannot get to the learning. So it is pivotal. It is pivotal that this structure exists in our classroom and in our world. And I think I'm going to speak to the 3 areas that you address in your books and that I really loved, and that I even use as a framework for my interview questions in my recent study, was agency, identity, and belonging. Boom. So how does this relate? First of all, I think who we are, how our identity ties in to our everyday life. How does well-being play into our identity? What role does it have? Number 1. Number 2, what do we feel we have agency over? And I think that again ties back to how we function in what we think is going to work for us on a day-to-day within our environment to support our well-being. If we don't feel like we have agency, or our perception of our agency is skewed about what we can and cannot control, then that's going to play into everything. And then belonging. How do we feel we belong? What's our perception of our belonging in our peer groups, in our collegial groups, in our home, friend group, whatever it is, social groups? Those 3 things are extremely fundamental. They are core to our well-being. They truly are. And we may not always think about it that way, but our perception of those 3 things is embedded all the time.
Those are the things that, we've had a lot of conversations at the Center for Arts Education and Social and Emotional Learning revisiting identity, belonging, agency, because the second you get comfortable with something, you lose perspective of what it is.
Yes.
And we've really doubled down because we've thought, is there something bigger? Is there something we're missing? And after a lot of circular conversation, the answer is no. There's nothing
Correct.
that we can't think of that falls into the ballpark of identity, belonging, or agency. One thing that you said that I absolutely adore, because I actually think that our profession of teaching, not just in music education, has really gotten good at SET, what I would call social and emotional teaching. But I think we've lost sight of the social and emotional needs of our students sometimes, and that's where social and emotional learning comes in.
Yeah.
There's a really key distinction there, and I think some of the strategies that you're helping us understand today, Rita, help us get beyond the I'm just going to get up there and social and emotional lecture, or I'm just going to get up and social and emotional present.
Mm-hmm.
But what are we going to practice so we build those routines?
And I will say that I think that because we have a lot, I am in a state right now where SEL is a mandated thing. And experiencing that as a music educator was difficult for me because it was, we're just going to roll out this platform. And so, of course, right away, the teacher's like, oh, another thing. No one's really talking to me about these things, about my own well-being, but I've got to be schooled to do this for my students. And then on top of that, let's just give you a lesson in a box, right? That may or may not resonate with you. That does not mean that you cannot embed practices. It does not take away, just because they've given you a platform. You as the teacher, I think the big thing that's really important for us to recognize is when we are able to talk to our students at any age, because elementary students pick up on it just as much as any other age student. When we're able to offer them that bit of vulnerability, that bit of, you know what, I know this might feel like this today, but let's really just zone in. Let me tell you how this relates for me. That's where we're not just teaching, but we're applying, we're bringing their attention to us, our awareness, right? And we're allowing them to see that we're human and we're vulnerable too. And I think that right there, because if the attitude is, oh my gosh, it's just this thing I have to do on my return period, it's so annoying, and if that's our attitude going in, we're never servicing our students. We're never going to get past that barrier. So I think as music educators, because we uniquely understand some of those deeper concepts, we've all been there. We've been forced to go there in our practices as being musicians. I think if we can bring that back to the surface and connect that way with whoever's in front of it, whether it's a return period group of students that we don't know, or it's our own students that we do know, I think that's really going to be a pivotal way of transferring this feeling of teaching to learning.
I love that word transfer, because that's what SEL is. It's how are we learning something in our music classroom that's going to transfer to the rest of their lives. So Rita, as we come to the end of our episode, I do want to give us some time to talk about your ensemble at Mason, because this is something that I think at this point, after our listeners and viewers have said, oh, wow, how do I do this? You've enacted so much of this as a practitioner. Tell us about your ensemble.
Yeah, so it's part of our Music for Wellbeing program. And the one thing I want to say about that is that our program is open to every single student on our campus. It's not a music therapy program. It's a little different because we're talking about the why. We're talking about the homeopathic. We're talking about understanding how music transfers through our systems as humans, vibration, energy, a little bit of the quantum, all the things, and how it interconnects. And so it's interesting, we have this healing arts ensemble, and it's very unconventional in a sense of school of music, right? Number one. Number two, the students that I get are from all different pathways. They might be psychology, they might be performance majors, they might be ed majors, technology majors, business majors, they might be music centered or not. And they come in, and I find this interesting because every semester it's like what you expected versus what you experienced. And they come in, they're like, I don't know what I'm going to do in this ensemble. And the first day it's, well, there's no music. Everything's improvisational. And we're using these healing instruments that do evoke cellular response in the body, crystal bowls, right? Exotic percussion, djembe. We're centering in on entrainment. We're centering in on waking up cells in our body that might be dormant that raise our vibration on the inside. And everything is through intention. And when I look at this from a objective view, I'm like, we are really cultivating the essence of art. We're going inward. We're finding intention within ourselves. Everything that we create has a healing intention, but we're doing it without judgment, without thinking, with the art of improvisation as just freely playing. You don't need to have experience in music to come into this ensemble. And when you do, you have to pause and shut your judging brain off and say, oh, I'm not going to judge what happened. Instead, I'm listening and responding. And I think that right there is the difference. They're not being told what to play. They have to inwardly decide how to respond to what they hear around them. And then we cultivate that through an intention that's collective. So I think of it more as forming this idea of collective vibration. And so we're creating soundscapes. I pivot then that role of experiencing to then them being the composer in the room. And so then they're creating a piece of art, a piece of music that is embedded with an intention that is them storytelling through the way they create the sound. But then at the recital process with our audience, we created this music. Every student has their own intention, and what it's coming from is a place of their own personal healing and growth. And that's the beauty of it, is that's what they're sharing, is something about them that we would have never known. Maybe they wouldn't have recognized, because we're coming into an environment where we're listening more than that we're responding to what we hear versus what we think versus what our minds are doing. So it's this ultimate idea of turning that off and just being present with each other. So it's been very powerful to see how that's changing for them over the course of the semester. Certainly something I never in a million years imagined in my life I would be doing as a music educator, like just wasn't a thing. But then I embedded some of those values into my choral ensembles. What does improvisation look like? How are we responding to each other, right? That's what we're there to do at some level. So it's changed my frame and my understanding of how we make and create music as well. And so it's been extremely powerful. It's a healing tool for sure in bringing me back to my core. And why is it what I do? What's the intention behind what I do every day and what they do every day? So
absolutely. How we've always done it doesn't have to be how we do it. And you've just absolutely given us another model. In my mind, when you were speaking to this idea of they had to listen to something and then they had to respond to it. We had to give and receive. Our 7-year-old and I were getting into pickleball, and it's about giving and it's about receiving, and we're reading. And I think our listeners and viewers have heard me say this multiple times, but I think as a society, we don't listen. We listen with only the intent of what we're going to say next, as opposed to, wow, I'm here just to listen to what you have to say, because that alone is enough and of value. And
absolutely.
Everything that you've said today has really gotten me thinking about my own practice, about how I think that the first step to awareness is realizing where you're out of balance. And I think some of the things that you've gotten us to think about today are really thought-provoking in that space. Rita, you are a game changer and a pioneer in the field, and I'm so thankful for you sharing some of your time today. Where can we find you, and what's next on your plate?
Yeah, so you can find me on socials. I'm on Instagram, Rita Gigliotti. I am on Facebook. I also am at George Mason University. You can Google me and just find my website there if you want to reach out. But I also have coming up, actually this summer, a really cool 3-day workshop that I think our viewers should know about, which includes both of us actually at George Mason. And it's performing arts well-being, performing arts teacher, let me rephrase that, performing arts teacher well-being and social emotional learning for the arts teachers. And I think that a lot of what we talked about today is at the forefront of that, what they'll experience, and then how they can feel more equipped to manage their well-being, maybe in different ways that they never thought of, and then also how they can feel more empowered to go back to their schools. So for me, this work is about empowering people to know that they can have agency where they think they haven't. They can readdress their identity and how they look at their day, and how they can find belonging in ways they didn't think possible, that will ultimately come together to cultivate their well-being, the way they practice social and emotional learning, the way they share that work with their students, and also with one another, their colleagues. Yeah, so it's,
Rita?
July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. I forgot that detail. It's in July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and it's at George Mason in Fairfax. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll make sure that the that link is in the show notes.
Oh, yeah,
and
thank
I
you.
cannot wait to collaborate with you on this project. That was perfection, to get us to think in terms of the intersection between identity, belonging, and agency, and the work that is always in service of empowerment. We speak about student empowerment very strongly.
Yes.
But we all need empowerment. We all need to feel like we are contributing in a value. My friend Rita, what a gift you've given us today.
You.
So many thanks.
Thank you. And thank you for all that you have done in this field and in this work of music education. You are amazing. And your research, your resources, the things that you have out there for all of us to use and learn from, they're vital to the world we're in right now. So thank you for that work. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here and to be your colleague and to work with you. And I'm just so excited.
And one step further, friend.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your kind words.
Yes, of
Such
course.
a gift. Thank you, Rita.
You're so welcome.
Friends, I hope we found some time today to not only recenter the value of well-being, but also think about some tangible ways we can start to embed that into our personal practice and how we can share that with our students. Such a gift Rita just gave us as we started to think about maybe areas that were out of balance and ways that we can correct that. My friends, for Music for All, I'm Scott Edgar. Thank you very much and have a great day. Bye-bye.